The marble floor of the lobby gave back the morning light without any warmth in it. In the center of that polished floor, wearing the white dress her mother had chosen, Vivian Whitfield gripped a bouquet of roses in one hand and a marriage certificate in the other. She leaned in toward the man in the plain shirt standing across from her and kept her voice low so the people behind them wouldn't hear. "I can't lose you over money," she said. "You won't have to," he answered. "That's the one thing about all this that lets me breathe easy." He didn't take offense. He looked down at the bouquet, then back up at her, and something that almost passed for a smile crossed his face without quite arriving. His name was Jack Doyle, 36 years old. His hands were cracked in the way that happens to men who earn their bread by carrying it. His shirt had been white more times in its life than anyone had a right to expect from it. Over his shoulder he carried a worn canvas bag, and hanging out of it upside down was a stuffed bear missing one eye. Behind them, lined up against the window, Vivian's family watched him, the way you watch a stain on a party tablecloth. Her mother stood very straight. A man in an expensive suit smiled from one side of his mouth. Two more relatives stood in dark clothes, counting down the minutes until whatever they called shame under their breath would finally be over. Nobody in that glass and money lobby knew one thing. The tower itself, the marble, the window, the floor they were standing on to humiliate the poor man. All of it belonged to him. She signed first. The pen was a good one, her mother's, of course. Eleanor Whitfield would never have let her daughter mark a certificate with a drugstore pen, and Vivian's hand did not shake because she had learned years ago not to let her hands say what her face refused to. She signed Vivian Whitfield in the same handwriting she'd used as a little girl on the thank you cards her mother used to dictate to her. Then she passed the pen to the man. Jack took it the way you take a borrowed tool, testing its weight first. He signed slowly, no last name. Just the first name. The notary, who had seen half the city get married, raised an eyebrow and said nothing, because a notary gets paid to see things and not to see things depending on the hour. "It's done," said the man in the gray suit who had brought the paperwork. "It's done." Two words that landed in that lobby like a slab of concrete. Vivian felt the ring slide onto her finger, cold, the kind bought by size and not by taste. And she thought, without wanting to think it, that even that ring wasn't entirely hers. She'd be handing it back to someone in 6 weeks. Everything in her life was borrowed. The dress, the name, even the husband. There was no kiss, nobody asked for one. At a real wedding, someone would have said, "You may kiss the bride." But this wasn't a wedding, this was a debt, wearing a wedding's clothes. And you don't kiss a debt. You sign it and hurry outside before it starts to smell. They went outside. The noon sun came straight down on the plaza in front of the tower. The one that showed up in every magazine. The tallest building on the coast, property of the Sterling Group. Vivian walked down the steps, still holding the bouquet, because she didn't know what else to do with it. And behind her came her family in a line, smelling of expensive perfume and poorly hidden relief. Her mother caught up with her on the last step and spoke without moving her lips, that trick certain women learn when they've spent a lifetime insulting people in public without anyone noticing. 6 weeks, said Eleanor. Smile and get through 6 weeks living among poor people. Then we sign the cancellation in front of the notary. This gets annulled and you go back to being who you were. She straightened Vivian's veil with 2 fingers, a gesture that from a distance might have looked like love. Nobody needs to know how low we fell, only you and me. And this doesn't end here. She looked at Jack, who was waiting 3 steps away with his bag over his shoulder, and couldn't find a noun she found small enough for him. His name is Jack, Mother, said Vivian. His name is whatever the paperwork says, said Eleanor. She put on her sunglasses, and with them put on the face she wore for the rest of the world. The Whitfields don't lose sweetheart. We only take pauses. By the car stood Grant Sinclair, who 2 years earlier had promised Vivian an Ocean View future and taken it back the same month the Whitfield name started sounding bad at the country club. He leaned against his car the way a man leans when he wants to be seen leaning, tie loose, wearing that elegant kind of pity that passes for cruelty in people raised never to raise their voice. "I had to come," Vivian said. He looked the groom up and down. lingered on the worn bag on the one-eyed bear hanging out of it, and smiled with his whole mouth without opening it. "Whenever you want to talk, once all this settles down, you know where to find me." Vivian didn't answer. She'd learned early that silence hurts certain people more than any response because it gives them nothing to work with. She walked past him, but she carried with her the way Grant's eyes had landed on the bear, the look of someone filing away a weakness to use later. And for the first time all morning, she felt something that wasn't shame and wasn't exhaustion. She felt, without quite understanding why, the urge to stand in front of that bear and shield it. The vehicle waiting for them wasn't a Whitfield car. It was an old work truck bed full of lumber, a can of nails, rolling around on the seat. Jack opened her door before he got in his own side. He didn't make a show of it. He did it the way a man does something out of habit, even though the woman climbing in wore a wedding dress and he wore a shirt that had seen more washes than future. He started the engine, and in the rear-view mirror, the tallest tower on the coast shrank down until it fit inside a little rectangle and then fit inside nothing at all. They didn't talk for a long while. Vivian watched the neighborhoods change skin through the window. First glass and marble, then brick, then laundry strung between balconies like flags from a war nobody won. Every block took her further from what she'd been, and a cold part of her, the part her mother had carefully trained, kept taking notes on the descent, the way you keep track of a debt. "You can toss the bouquet if you want," he said, without taking his eyes off the road. "There's nowhere nice to put it at the apartment." "It isn't mine either," she said. "My mother picked it." Jack nodded slowly, like that told him something, and didn't say anything else. She was grateful he didn't ask. She'd ridden in too many cars with men who only asked questions so they could collect on the answers later. The building where the truck stopped had 3 floors and a stairwell that smelled like everyone's dinner at once. They climbed to the 2nd floor. Jack had his key out when the door swung open from the inside and a little girl appeared. She was 5, or however old 5 looked on her. Small and thin, with the enormous eyes of a child who learned early to watch before speaking. She planted herself in the doorway with both hands on the frame blocking it, and looked Vivian up and down, without fear and without welcome, with the terrible seriousness of children who already lost something big and don't intend to lose anything else. "Who's this?" she asked, looking at her father. "Her name is Vivian," Jack said. "She's going to stay with us for a while." How long? Jack opened his mouth and closed it. A man can tell the world plenty of lies, but there's a pair of eyes in every house that lies don't get past. Vivian watched him hesitate, and in that hesitation, she saw something she hadn't expected to find in the poor man they'd married her off to. She saw him afraid not of her, of disappointing his daughter. A while he finally said, "I don't know how long. We'll see." The girl chewed on the answer. She didn't like it. "We'll see" is the currency grown-ups pay children with when they've got nothing else. And this one seemed to already know that. She looked once more at Vivian, in white, holding someone else's bouquet, wearing nobody's ring, and decided right there in the doorway that she wasn't going to love her yet. Then she turned and went inside, dragging by one ear the bear that Vivian had been taught to look down on before she'd even met it. The apartment was a single big room split up by furniture. A hand-sanded wooden table, 2 chairs that didn't match, and a smaller 3rd one, a mattress for the girl behind a curtain. In one corner, tools hung in careful order, each on its own nail, as if the only thing that house truly respected was whatever could be used to build something. "The bedroom's yours," Jack said, pointing to the only door. "I sleep out here on the couch. Josie's behind the curtain." He got ahead of the look on her face. "There's no other kind of arrangement, ma'am. We signed a piece of paper, not a body. You sleep easy." Vivian looked at him. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her all day, and it came wrapped in the roughness of someone who doesn't know how to say kind things any other way. She didn't know how to answer. She set the bouquet on the sanded table, and the roses already wilting from the heat let a petal drop into the sawdust. "What do you build?" she asked, just to say something, just so the silence wouldn't be the only thing left. "Whatever they tell me to," Jack said. He hung the bag on a nail. The bear ended up upside down again, watching them with its one eye. Walls, roofs, foundations mostly. He wiped his hands on his pants, an old habit worn in over years. People think a building stands because of how high it reaches. It stands because of how deep it goes down. What holds everything up is the part nobody ever sees. He shrugged, almost apologizing for the little speech. Occupational hazard. A man starts talking like that after enough years. Vivian kept the sentence. She didn't know why she kept it, the way you keep a key to a door you don't yet know what's behind. That afternoon, while the girl pretended to sleep behind the curtain and the man worked downstairs, planing a board so he wouldn't have to plane his own thoughts, Vivian sat on the borrowed bed in the borrowed room, still in her wedding dress, because she hadn't brought anything to change into, and she counted. 6 weeks. 42 nights in that house of poor people, and then the signature and the annulment and going back to who she'd been. 42. She said it out loud quietly to make it feel real. And for some reason that made her angry at herself for not understanding the number that should have sounded like a sentence, sounded for one flickering instant like something else entirely. Outside, his hand plane moved back and forth over the wood, even patient shaving splinter by splinter, the roughness off something nobody was going to finish that night. The first night was the longest Vivian could remember, and she had known long nights. She couldn't sleep. The mattress was firmer than her old one, and the sheets smelled like cheap soap and sunlight, which turned out to be a less humble smell than she'd expected. What kept her awake wasn't the bed. It was the silence, different from the silence in her mother's house. That silence had been made of expensive things, quietly humming the air conditioner, the new refrigerator, the electric gate. Here, the silence was alive. The wood creaked, a faucet dripped. And every so often through the wall, the girl stirred and said something in her sleep. Loose words that didn't form a sentence, like someone arguing with a person who wasn't there anymore. Around 2 in the morning, Vivian got up for water, crossed the big room on tiptoe, and found him awake on the couch, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the way you stare at a blueprint that won't square up. "There's water in the pitcher," Jack said without turning around. "It's cold." He doesn't sleep well in stretches either. He sat up a little. "The hands wear out before the head does. It should be the other way around. But nobody gets to pick the order." Vivian drank standing by the window. Down below, the street was empty except for a stray dog and a motorcycle somewhere far off. None of it looked anything like her life. And yet, for a second, glass in hand, the man silent behind her, not asking her for anything, she felt a strange kind of truce, the truce of being somewhere nobody expected any performance from her. In her old house, there had always been a performance. Here, for the first time in years, she was just a woman thirsty at 2 in the morning. "My mother's coming Friday," she said, and didn't know why she was telling him. "To make sure I'm still miserable. It puts her at ease. If she saw me comfortable, she'd think I'd given up." "You haven't given up," he said. "You're serving a sentence. That's different." Jack nodded in the dim light. He didn't argue the number of days with her or try to sell her comfort. A man who works with weight learns not to argue the weight with anybody. "I'll make soup Friday," he said, nothing more. "Uncomfortable company? You feed them. They leave sooner." Vivian almost smiled. Almost. She went back to her room before the almost could show. The job site where Jack worked was 40 minutes away, in the new part of town, and it was though it took her a while to connect the dots, one of the very towers belonging to the Sterling Group, another glass spire, climbing toward the sky with the invisible owner's name on the billboard out front. Vivian went there once that first week to bring him a thermos he'd forgotten, because Josie refused to stay home alone with her and left her no choice but to bring them both along in the truck. She saw him from a distance before he saw her, and it took her a moment to recognize him, not because he looked different, but because he looked whole. In the wedding lobby, among the marble and the suits, Jack had been a stain, a man out of place, enduring contempt with his head down. Here, hard hat on and tool belt around his waist, he was something else entirely. The other workers spoke to him differently. They asked him things. The foreman, an older man with a white mustache everyone called Walt, was arguing with him over a blueprint spread across a barrel, and it was Jack who put his finger down and said, "This won't crack in 2 winters," and it was the old man who nodded. "That kid Walt," told Vivian, while she watched Jack climb down, "for the thermos reads a building the way other people read the paper. He lays a hand on a wall and tells you its age, same as reading the age off a horse's back." He laughed under his breath. "He could be anywhere, that one. And he picks the pit. Go figure why a man chooses the well when he's got the sky waiting for him." The line stuck in her head. She filed it away next to the other one about foundations in a drawer she was starting to fill without noticing with everything that man never bothered to explain. Jack came up, took the thermos, and his hand brushed hers, taking it. It was nothing. It was the contact you get when 2 people hand each other an object, but his palm was rough warm from sun and work, and she who had spent years touching soft hands, her mother's, Grant's, doctors' and lawyers' hands, men who had never lifted anything heavier than a glass, felt that roughness, the way you feel water after a long thirst. She pulled her hand back quickly. She was angry at herself for pulling it back quickly, which is the way a person confesses that something got to them. "Thanks for coming," Jack said. "Josie came. I just drove her." "I know," he said. He glanced at the girl peeking out from the truck with the bear in her lap. "Still, thanks. She doesn't ride along with just anybody." And he went back to the tower, back down into the depths to the foundations nobody would ever see, leaving her with a gratitude she hadn't asked for and didn't know where to put. The real spark, the one that mattered, didn't come at night 3 days later, and it wasn't the man who lit it. It was fever. Vivian woke at 3 in the morning to a sound she'd never heard up close before. A child coughing in that way you can't stop. She sat up in bed. Through the wall, Josie was crying quietly, that worn-out crying of sick children who've already gotten tired of calling for anyone. Vivian waited a second, too. She waited for him to get up, but Jack wasn't there. She remembered with a jolt that it was his night on the crew pouring concrete. He'd told her, "Don't wait dinner for me." They were alone, the girl who didn't love her. And she could have stayed in bed. Nobody would have judged her. She wasn't his daughter. It wasn't her house. It wasn't her life. 42 days and out. But the crying kept going. Smaller, more alone each time, and something in that sound cut straight through everything her mother had ever taught her about what was hers and what wasn't. She got up, crossed the room barefoot, pulled the curtain back. Josie was burning up, her face flushed, hair stuck to her forehead, the bear pressed to her chest like a life raft. Seeing Vivian, the girl, made an enormous effort to look like she didn't need her. "I didn't call you," she said, voice breaking. "I want my dad." "I know you didn't call me Vivian," said, kneeling by the mattress. "Your dad's at work. I'm here instead." "And where does complaining get you?" She didn't know where the tone came from. It wasn't the soft, false tone grown-ups use on children who aren't theirs. It was dry, almost like talking to an equal. And maybe that's exactly why the girl who distrusted sweetness because sweetness had abandoned her once already, let her shoulders drop a little. Vivian didn't know the first thing about fevers. She'd never taken care of anyone. In her old house, people were paid to do that. But she did what some part of herself she didn't know she had told her to do. She soaked a cloth in cool water and laid it on the girl's forehead, dug through the cabinet until she found cough syrup, measured a spoonful, reading the label twice by her phone's flashlight. She talked to her not about children's things, about anything at all, the stray dog outside, the motorcycle passing by, just so the girl would have a voice to hold on to, because Vivian remembered from her own childhood fevers that the worst part of being sick isn't the heat, it's the loneliness of the heat. The fever broke near dawn. Josie finally fell asleep all at once, the way children do, mid-sentence. But half gone already, she reached out and found Vivian's wrist and held on and wouldn't let go, the same way her father held on to a doorknob he couldn't decide to open or close, though neither of them could have known that yet. Vivian stayed sitting on the floor, her arm gone numb, the girl gripping her wrist and didn't move so she wouldn't wake her. And sometime in that early morning, she understood something that scared her more than any debt ever had. That taking care of someone who wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't hers, with hands she'd only ever used for signing papers and wearing rings, had been the easiest, cleanest thing she'd done in years. That's how Jack found her when he got back from the tower cement dust up to his eyebrows and 12 hours of exhaustion on him. The woman in the wedding dress, now in a t-shirt and barefoot, sitting on the floor of his poorhouse, holding his sleeping daughter's wrist like something that might slip away. He stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything, but something moved across his face, a face used to showing nothing. And for the first time since the wedding, he looked at Vivian the way you don't look at a 6-week sentence. He looked at her the way you look at a foundation, something deep, something that if you let it could end up holding up an entire house. And it scared him. Because a man who spent his life hiding what he had knows better than anyone how much it costs to let somebody see what's really underneath. The bear lost an arm on a Tuesday. It was the game's fault, not carelessness. Josie had gotten better from the fever, and the way children celebrate getting better, she'd been dragging the bear around the apartment on adventures only she understood, until on one of those adventures, the arm stitched and restitched too many times finally gave out and hung by a thread. The girl looked at it with the horror you reserve for a wound in a thing you love most, her mouth trembling right on the edge of the kind of crying you cry over things that can't be fixed. "Bring him here," Vivian said. Josie pressed the bear to her chest, suspicious even of that. "You don't know how." "I know how to sew," Vivian said, holding out her hand. "It's one of the few things they taught me that's actually useful. Bring him. Bruno's got one night left in him, and we're not going to waste it crying." The girl hesitated. Then very slowly, the way you hand something over to a surgeon, to a relative, she placed the bear in Vivian's hands. Vivian found needle and thread in an old cookie tin that no longer held cookies, and sat at the sanded table under the yellow light to sew the arm back onto a one-eyed bear she'd been taught less than 2 weeks earlier to look down on. She sewed carefully, more carefully than the bear required, and while she sewed, Josie, who had sat down across from her to supervise the operation, started talking, the way children talk when they think you're not paying attention, without realizing they're giving everything away. "Bruno used to be sewn by my mom," she said. "Before." Vivian didn't look up from the stitching. She'd learned in 2 weeks that you had to look at this girl sideways, never straight on, if you wanted her to tell you the truth. "And who sews him now, Dad?" "But Dad sews ugly. His stitches are too big." She lowered her voice. "I don't tell him because it makes him sad." And there it was, in one sentence, from a 5-year-old the entire size of that house, a girl who swallowed a small truth so she wouldn't make her father sad, and a father who sewed ugly so his daughter would never lack for somebody to mend her. Vivian finished the arm tied off a firm knot, and without thinking about it, because thinking about it would have ruined it, she also sewed the bear's missing eye back on, using a button she picked off her own wedding dress, which she wasn't planning to wear again anyway, and certainly not to be anybody's bride in. When she handed the bear back with both arms and both eyes, Josie looked at it the way you look at a small miracle. She didn't say thank you. Children who've learned to distrust sweetness don't say thank you right away. First, they check that the gift doesn't come with a bill attached. But that night, for the first time, she left the curtain to her corner pulled halfway open, just a finger's width, just enough that if the fever came back at dawn, or the fear came back, there'd be somebody on the other side. Jack saw the curtain half open and didn't say anything. But that night on the couch, it took him longer than ever to fall asleep, eyes open in the dark, knowing the house was growing roots on a side he hadn't accounted for, and that roots, once they take hold, don't ask permission before they crack the concrete. Eleanor came Friday, as promised, to confirm her daughter's misery. She climbed the 2 flights of stairs with the face of someone walking to the gallows knocked with one gloved knuckle, and when Vivian opened the door, the mother walked in without a greeting, sweeping the place with her eyes, cataloging the poverty for future comfort. The 2 mismatched chairs, the sanded table, the smell of everyone's dinner in the stairwell. "Lord," she said under her breath, 40 more days. "Count the days, sweetheart, count them." But there was soup on the stove. Jack had left it made before heading to the tower lentils with a ham-bone bay leaf from a little plant on the windowsill, and the whole apartment smelled like food, made by somebody for somebody. Eleanor looked at the pot the way you look at a trap, and when Vivian, out of manners or something worse, served her a bowl, the mother tasted it with just the tip of her spoon, ready to turn her nose up. She couldn't. It was good. Good in a way none of the restaurants she frequented ever managed, because restaurant soup is always missing the one ingredient this had: the patience of a tired man cooking before dawn for a house he still didn't know was his. "It's passable," Eleanor said. And passable was what she called things that were good when she didn't want to admit it. "He made it," Vivian said. Her mother set the spoon down. "A poor man who cooks. How novel." "It's all they've got," Vivian said, "making something out of nothing." Eleanor dabbed her mouth. "Don't fall in love with the nothing, Vivian. Nothing's charming to visit. Living in it is a different story. I lived closer to nothing when I was young than I ever told you, and I promise you, hardship has no poetry to it. Only cold." Vivian didn't argue, but for the first time in her life, listening to her mother look down on the soup, she felt that the one speaking from the cold wasn't the poorhouse. It was her mother. And that there were many kinds of cold, and that she'd spent 24 years with central heating shivering from one no furnace could ever fix. Eleanor left sooner than she'd planned to stay exactly as Jack predicted. Uncomfortable company you feed them, they leave sooner. The afternoon that changed everything, though nothing seemed to change that afternoon, was one of those strange sunny days the coast hands out in the middle of fall. Jack had brought Josie and Vivian to the tower because it was Walt's birthday, and the crew was grilling on the 12th floor, open air, the whole city stretched out below. Vivian stepped away to look 12 floors down, the city and beyond it, the ocean, and around her, men with cracked hands, laughing about simple things, passing plates, treating her, Vivian Whitfield, the one with the name, like just one more person with no idea who she used to be, not caring either way. Walt handed her a cup. "Look at him," the old man said, nodding his chin toward Jack, who had Josie up on his shoulders and was showing her from the safe edge where every part of the building was going to go. "He's teaching that little girl to read blueprints. 5 years old, and she already knows where a column goes." Walt drank. "That man could give that kid anything she wants. Anything. And the only thing he teaches her is how things hold each other up." He glanced sideways at Vivian with those old eyes that see more than they should. "There are men who hide what they have because they're ashamed it's too little. And there are men who hide it because somebody once loved them only for that, and they don't plan on making the same mistake twice. This one's the second kind, ma'am. I've known him since he was a laborer like any other. Trust me, he's the second kind." Vivian didn't fully understand, but she kept the line, the third one now in the drawer, that was starting to fill up, and for 1 second the whole drawer seemed to want to say something she wasn't ready to read yet. She looked back at Jack, up on the edge of his own tower without her knowing it, his daughter on his shoulders, autumn's sun on him, and for the first time since the marble lobby, Vivian didn't see the poor man they'd married her off to. She saw the man. She saw the hands that healed rebar, the patience of the soup, the big ugly stitches he used to mend the bear so his daughter would never lack a mother's touch. She saw everything her world had taught her to call nothing, and it suddenly looked like more than everything her world had ever called everything. It was 1 second. Then Josie shouted to be put down, and they set her down, and someone told a joke, and the afternoon went on. But something in that second had slipped under Vivian's door without asking permission, and it was already inside, and it wasn't coming back out. That night in the truck on the way home, Josie asleep between them, the bear with both arms pressed against her cheek, Vivian spoke, looking out the window. "They picked me a poor husband so nobody would want him," she said quietly, "so they could give him back without it hurting." She swallowed. "I wonder if my mother ever thought about the fact that I'm also somebody who gets given back once I stop being useful." Jack didn't take his eyes off the road. He drove in silence a while, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "People don't get given back," he finally said. They get lifted up or they get left behind. There's no third option. He shifted his hand on the wheel. Your mother picked one. In her place, I'd have picked the other. And he didn't say anything more. But neither of them for the rest of the drive turned on the radio or reached for anything to fill the quiet, because the silence between them had changed into a different kind. It wasn't the silence of two strangers who'd signed a paper anymore. It was the other kind. The kind that only exists between people who, without saying so, have started not wanting the other one to get out of the car. Grant Sinclair wasn't a man to give up after one rooftop barbecue. He waited for his moment with the patience of people who never had to rush for anything, and he found it on a Thursday outside the grocery store when Vivian was walking home with 2 bags and the girl by the hand. He appeared the way people who've been rich their whole lives appear, before you see him coming, already planted, taking up the sidewalk like the sidewalk owed him something. "Let me help you with that," he said, and lifted a bag out of her hand before she could refuse. "That's not necessary." "It's necessary that we talk." He looked at Josie, who had pressed herself against Vivian's leg and was watching him with the exact right amount of distrust she gave anything that shined. His daughter, poor thing, growing up without a mother, and on top of it, he dropped his voice like he was confiding a secret for her own good. "Vivian, this is insane, and you know it. What's left? 5 weeks? 4? Then you sign the cancellation, it gets annulled, and this whole thing becomes a horrible story we laugh about telling people." He smiled. "I made a mistake with you, leaving when things got hard. I was a coward, but a man can make things right. That's why I came back." Vivian let him finish, and noticed, with a clarity that surprised her, that Grant's words were almost the same words her mother kept repeating, and the same words from the magazines, and the same words from her whole old world. An entire language built to convince her that this poor house was a parenthesis and not a sentence. "You left when I stopped being useful," she said, "and you came back the moment you heard I might be useful again." "Don't fix anything, Grant. Fixing is for people who broke something by accident. You broke on purpose." Grant stopped smiling. Men like him mind exactness more than they mind rejection. He handed the bag back to her with a stiff motion. "You're confused," he said. "You've gotten attached to poverty because up close it looks like dignity." And then, tie already looser, he threw the stone he'd actually come to throw. "You know what's strange? I looked into your husband a little. A construction worker. Perfect widower, right? Too perfect. A man with no last name, so clean he doesn't show up anywhere." He straightened his jacket. "People who don't show up anywhere, Vivian, either they're nobody or they're somebody who doesn't want to be found. And for a woman, both of those end badly." He left, leaving Vivian with the 2 bags and a splinter in her head she hadn't asked for and wasn't going to be able to pull out on her own. Or he's nobody, or he's somebody who doesn't want to be found. That night, she looked at Jack differently, not with distrust, yet with a question. She watched him hang the bag on its nail, put the tools away each in its place, cut the bread into even pieces, and for the first time, it seemed to her that in all that order, all that calm, all that man who read towers like newspapers and picked the well when he had the sky, there was something that didn't add up. A poor man isn't that calm. Real poverty makes noise. It has urgency. It watches the price of everything. Jack didn't watch the price of anything. Jack had the stillness of someone who never once, not a single day, went to sleep unsure whether he'd eat the next one. She didn't ask. But the question moved into the house the same way the question of whether she'd leave had moved in on him. And now there were 2 silent questions crossing the table at soup time. Eleanor pushed things along that same week. She summoned Vivian into the city to one of the old-fashioned cafes with tablecloths and waiters who knew her, to remind her on home turf whose daughter she was. The notary confirmed the date her mother said, stirring a tea she had no intention of drinking. In 25 days, the full cancellation of the Whitfield debt gets signed. Total Vivian. We come out clean like none of it ever happened. She leaned in. And that same day, we file the annulment. It's all arranged with the lawyer. You don't have to do a thing. Just be there and sign. Same as always. Be there and sign. Same as always. Vivian looked at her mother and saw behind the flawless makeup a woman who had learned to survive by turning her daughter into currency once, and who was fully prepared to do it as many times as it took, not out of cruelty, and that was the worst part, but because she genuinely believed she was saving her. Her mother believed in money the way other people believe in God, with a faith so total she never questioned it, only practiced it. And if I don't want to annul it, Vivian said. She said it quietly. She didn't even fully know she was going to say it until she heard it come out. Eleanor set down her teaspoon. Don't talk nonsense. And if it isn't nonsense, Mother... Her mother took her hand across the tablecloth, and for one instant the gesture almost looked like a mother's. Listen to me carefully, because this is love. Everything else is a fairy tale. That man has nothing. Nothing. And nothing, sweetheart, runs out of charm fast. One hard winter with the girl sick and no money for it. One leak in the roof that doesn't get fixed because there isn't enough to fix it. You'll look at him in 3 years and you won't see the man who made you soup. You'll see everything he cost you. I've watched more love die of cold than of heartbreak. I'm telling you, I buried one. She squeezed her hand. Sign and thank me when you're 40 for making you do it. Vivian didn't answer, but on the bus ride home 6 blocks from the apartment, she carried Grant's splinter on one side of her head and her mother's prophecy on the other, and the two together made a brand new kind of fear. Fear of getting this wrong. Fear of confusing a performance with a home again. Because what if her mother was right, and the warmth of that house was only the novelty talking, and in 3 years the cold would find her just the same minus the heater and with no way out? She came home with that look on her face, and Jack, who had spent weeks learning her looks, read the fear on it, and that's where he pulled back. Because Jack, who had spent his whole life hiding exactly for a moment like this one, for the moment the woman would look at him with doubt about whether he was worth staying for, recognized that look. He'd seen it before. He'd seen it on his first wife's face back when he wasn't the owner of anything yet, in the bad months. That look of doing the math on what you lose loving a poor man. His wife had done the math and stayed but for the other reason, because afterward he'd stopped being poor, and he never knew until she died whether she'd loved him or the tower he started building. That doubt had hollowed him out from the inside, and it was exactly the doubt he'd sworn never to feel again. So he did what people who've been burned once do. He closed off. He noticed her mother's face on her. Did she come by? He asked, flatter than he meant to. Yes, and she reminded you of the date? Yes. Good. Jack hung up the bag. The bear ended up looking at them again with its 2 new eyes. It's good she reminds you. That's the healthy thing. He cut the bread without looking at her. 25 days left. A person shouldn't live in a house they've already scheduled to move out of, gets attached, and then the moving costs you more than it should. He set the plate in front of her. Correct. It's getting cold. Eat. Early start tomorrow. Vivian looked at him without understanding where this new man had come from, the one handing her back exactly the distance she'd been closest to crossing that very night. She didn't know, couldn't know, that he was defending himself, that every dry word cost him double, that this bit about the moving costing more than it should was the armor of a man who'd already paid one impossible moving bill once and had no intention of paying another. She only saw the cold, and that night the cold proved her mother right. He's right, Vivian said, and she armored herself too, because pride is the only blanket left for people who've had every other one taken away. It was foolish of me. 25 days. I'm counting them. Count them, he said. They ate in silence. A different silence than any before. Not strangers' silence, not the silence of people in it together, the worst kind of all. 2 people who already mattered to each other, who've just each decided separately, out of fear, to stop showing it. Behind the curtain, Josie, who at 5 already read grown-up silences better than she read her letters, hugged the bear and didn't come out to say goodnight. Outside it started to rain. An old leak in the bedroom ceiling found its way in and started dripping, drop by drop, onto a pan Jack set down without a word. And that night, nobody in that house slept all the way through. Not the man hiding a fortune, Not the woman counting days, not the girl who already loved them both and felt with the instinct of someone who'd already lost one family that this one was about to break too. The leak dripped until dawn. Drop, drop. Like a clock nobody dared wind that night. The one who finally broke the ice wasn't either of the grown-ups. It was Josie. 3 days were left before the signing. The girl had spent a week acting strange, quiet, barely eating. And that afternoon, Vivian found her behind the curtain, bare clutched tight, a terrible decision on her face. I heard Josie said without being asked. I heard Dad on the phone. He said 25 days, and he said annulment. She looked up those big eyes of a girl who already lost one and knows exactly how the beginning of the end sounds. Annulment is when something breaks and doesn't get fixed. I looked it up. She squeezed the bear. You're going to leave, same as Mom left. Except Mom didn't want to, and you do. Vivian went breathless. She knelt in front of the mattress, and in the second she reached for something to say, she found she had no lie ready, because the lies she'd brought from her old world were all built for grown-ups, and in front of that child, like in front of any child, they wouldn't come out. Your mom got taken by something she never chose, she said slowly. I don't have to leave because of something I didn't choose. That's different. Then why'd you say annulment? And there it was, the 5-year-old question no lawyer knows how to answer. Then why? Vivian opened her mouth to explain the unexplainable, the debt, the arrangement, the signature, all that grown-up language that exists so people can do harm without feeling like they're doing it. And no words came because all at once, looking at the girl, she heard herself for the first time. There was no why. There wasn't one single reason, not one, to leave that house that didn't come from her mother's mouth or Grant's or fear. Not one reason was actually hers. I'm not leaving, Vivian said. And saying it, she knew it was true. I'm not signing any annulment. I'm staying. Did you hear me? I'm staying. Even if it's poor, even with the leaky roof, even if your dad sews ugly, I'm staying with the two of you. Josie looked at her for a long time, checking the way she checked everything, that it didn't come with a bill attached. Then she did something she hadn't done in 2 months. She let go of the bear and with both hands free, threw her arms around Vivian's neck, all of her with that sparrow-weight kids have, and said against her shoulder quietly the words she'd been holding on to just in case. Stay, Mom. Vivian didn't correct her. She couldn't. She stayed there kneeling, the girl hanging on her, the bear fallen between them, and over Josie's shoulder she saw Jack standing in the doorway. He'd come home early from the tower and heard all of it, and his face wore the look of a man who'd just been shown all at once everything he'd decided not to let himself want. That night Vivian told him straight out. I'm not annulling it, she said. I know what my mother's going to say. I know about the cold and the leaks and the 3 years. Let her say it. I'm choosing this. I choose it. She lifted her chin. I'm not asking for anything back, not even that you love me. I'm only telling you so it doesn't catch you by surprise on signing day. Jack listened, and for 1 second he came close. Vivian saw the second. He came close to telling her the truth right then in that kitchen with the pan catching the leak in the corner. He came close to saying, there's no cold to fear, woman. The tower I married you in belongs to me. The cold your mother's so afraid of doesn't exist. But the man who'd spent his whole life hiding didn't learn to show himself in one night. The old fear beat the second. He thought if I tell her now that I'm rich, I'll never know if she chose this or if she chose the tower. And because he was a coward with words, the way everyone who's been burned once is, he didn't say what he needed to say. 3 days left, he said instead, voice tight. Let the signing happen first. We'll talk about all of it after. I promise you. Just let the signing pass. Vivian didn't understand why he kept putting it off, but she nodded. She'd already done the hard part, which was choosing. The rest, she thought, was just paperwork. She had no idea how much paperwork. The day of the signing came in clear. The appointment was at the downtown notary's office at 11, and everyone went. Eleanor, in a new outfit, the family lawyer with his folder, Vivian silent, and Jack in the only good shirt he owned, the one from the wedding ironed by his own hand. Josie stayed behind with Walt. In the notary's waiting room sat the representative for the creditor, there to sign off on the cancellation of the Whitfield debt. And also waiting, though nobody had invited him, was Grant Sinclair. "I came as a friend of the family," Grant said, though he hadn't come as anybody's friend. He carried a folder of his own, and in it the stone he'd spent weeks sharpening. "Before anyone signs anything, I think everyone deserves to know who Vivian actually got married to. I looked into this man." He set the folder down on the table theatrically. "No last name on the certificate. No verified address longer than a year. No registered employment with any company. A ghost. A nobody who wormed his way into a good family smelling like heaven knows what." He looked to Eleanor for backup. "If I were you, I wouldn't sign anything until we know what we're dealing with." Nobody said a word. The silence sat down in the middle of the room like a fifth guest. And then the creditor's representative, an older man in a gray suit who'd been quiet in the corner the whole time, stood up, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the tired voice of someone who's spent years keeping somebody else's secret. "The gentleman is right about one thing," he said. "This man doesn't appear on record at any company." He paused. "He appears on all of them." He opened his own folder and turned it around on the table so everyone could see. "Jack has no last name on the marriage certificate because he specifically asked us to leave it off, for reasons you're about to understand. The creditor of the Whitfield family, the holder of the debt being canceled here today, the sole owner of the Sterling Group, is him." He pointed at Jack. "The man your daughter married, ma'am. He's the wealthiest man in the country. The tower where the wedding took place belongs to him. The marble floor you all walked on to humiliate him belongs to him. All of it belongs to him." Nobody breathed. Eleanor went white under her makeup. Grant opened his mouth and nothing came out. His folder full of ghosts suddenly turned into proof of his own foolishness. And Vivian just stared at Jack, at the poor man she'd married, at the man with the cracked hands and the overwashed shirt, the one who cooked ugly and made soup at dawn, and she felt the entire floor of her life shift 2 inches and settle somewhere new. Jack didn't look at Eleanor, or at Grant, or at the notary. He looked at her, only her. "I was going to tell you after the signing," he said, and his voice, the voice that never shook, shook now. "On purpose after, because if I told you before," he ran a hand over his face. "Forgive me, Vivian. It's cowardice, nothing else. I was loved once for what I have, not for what I am. It hollowed me out. And when I saw you, the daughter of the one man who ever treated me like a person when I was nobody, I thought just once in my life I want to be chosen without the tower in front of me. That's why I hid it. Not to trick you, to find out." He looked down. "And you chose 2 nights ago with the leaky roof, not knowing any of this." He looked back up and his eyes were bright. "You have no idea what that's worth to a man like me. No tower can pay for that." And there Vivian said the line back, the one she'd said the first day in the lobby as a shield. She said it turned inside out and sincere in front of her mother, in front of Grant, in front of the notary, and in front of God. "On our wedding day, I told you the one thing that gave me any peace in all of this was that you had nothing," she said. She stepped closer, took his rough hand, the one that carried weight from underneath. "I was wrong, Jack. It wasn't the nothing that saved me." She squeezed his hand. "What saved me was that having everything, you never once put it in front of me. You never bought me. You let me choose the poor version." Her voice broke, and she let it. "The richest man in the country. And the only thing he ever wanted from me was the one thing you can't buy. That's how I knew. I married that man. I already married him." Eleanor took a step forward, some line ready in her mouth, some calculation. It didn't come. For the first time in her life, faced with a figure that large, the woman who believed in money the way other people believe in God found herself out of scripture. And Grant, who'd come to expose a ghost, picked up his folder in silence and walked out of the notary's office without anyone seeing him off, chased by the one thing that truly chases men like him. ridicule which makes no noise but never lets go. There was no shouting, no blood, just an unsigned certificate on the table, a poor man who turned out to own the city, and a woman who'd chosen him before she knew any of it, which is the only way a man like that could ever finally let himself be loved. They got married for real that spring, and the second wedding looked nothing like the first. No marble, no tower. Jack, who could have rented the most expensive venue on the coast and filled it with people he'd never met, chose Walt's backyard instead, a grapevine giving shade, a set of borrowed chairs that didn't match, because, in that family, the chairs never matched and nobody pretended otherwise anymore. A local judge officiated, the crew from the job site came hands scrubbed clean for the occasion, and everyone brought something, a dish, a guitar, a bouquet cut from their own garden. And those bouquets, the ones cut from a garden you actually own, are the ones that are worth something, even if they never make it into a magazine. Vivian didn't wear the first wedding dress. She'd given it away. She wore something simple, and in her hair, instead of a veil, flowers that Josie had insisted on pinning in herself, crooked, slightly wrong, perfect because this time it was Josie who carried the rings, walking slowly across the yard, serious, with the weight of the job, a small pillow between her hands. And on top of the pillow, along with the 2 rings, since there was no talking her out of it, rode Bruno the bear, both arms intact, both eyes intact. One of them, a button sewn from a lapel that belonged to nobody anymore. People laughed warmly. Jack didn't. Jack watched the bear climb the little makeshift altar and had to set his jaw because he, better than anyone, knew where that bear had come from, and everything that had needed mending in that house for it to arrive there whole. Eleanor came. That much has to be said. She came, and it was the hardest thing she'd done in her life, because she had to sit in a borrowed chair in a construction worker's backyard and watch her daughter marry the man she'd chosen specifically because she'd believed him to be a nobody. The irony would have finished her off if something in her hadn't softened just 1 degree that morning. She came up to Vivian before the ceremony without her sunglasses for once and told her quietly the most honest thing she'd said to her in years. "I taught you to count what a man has," she said. She fixed a crooked flower in Vivian's hair, and this time the gesture was a mother's all the way through. "I'm glad you didn't listen to me. Learn from your daughter, not from me. She chose him before I did, and she didn't even know how to count yet." It wasn't forgiveness. In real families, forgiveness doesn't arrive in one sentence. It comes in drops over years, the same way everything good in that story had come. But it was a start. And Vivian, who had spent her whole life waiting on her mother for an approval that never fit the shape she needed, took this one, crooked and late as it was, and let it be enough. From the old house, Vivian wanted almost nothing. They could have lived anywhere they wanted. The man owned half the city. Jack offered her everything once the first week, with a list in his hand and a clumsiness that was almost touching, like someone who never learned that what belonged to him could make somebody happy without buying them first. Vivian read the list: houses with views, cars, trips, and set it down on the sanded table. "I only want 2 things," she said. "I want Josie to have a room with a window facing east, so the sun gets her early. Kids who grow up with morning sun turn out less scared. And I want you to keep making the soup." She took his hand, the one that carried weight from below. "Everything else, keep it or give it away or do with it whatever you did before me. But don't put it in front of me like I'm supposed to change my face for it. I already married the one who makes the soup. I don't know the other one, and I don't need to. They built a house, not a tower one that stood on how deep its foundation went, and not on how high it climbed." Jack raced part of it with his own hands weekends, with Walt directing from a folding chair because his knees couldn't take the scaffolding anymore, and Josie handing him nails one at a time, dead serious like she was taking part in something sacred. The house had the east-facing room. It had a big kitchen for the soup, and on the shelf in the living room, in the spot where other families put a trophy or an expensive vase, it had exactly one object of honor. Bruno the bear sitting up, missing the sight in one eye, mended in the other, watching the whole house with the dignity of something that survived. One day, Once they were settled in, a reporter came by, one of the ones who'd spent years chasing the face of the invisible owner of the Sterling Group. Seeing the bear on a shelf that could have held anything money could buy, he asked with a little smirk why the richest man in the country kept a broken toy in his place of honor, instead of something actually worth something. Jack looked at him. Then he looked at the bear and answered with the calm of a man who no longer owes anyone an explanation. "Because it isn't broken," he said. "It's mended, that's different. Broken is what gets thrown out. Mended is what somebody decided was worth fixing." He walked over to the shelf and straightened the bear's fallen ear. "People think a house stands because of what you can see, the walls, the furniture, the roof. I build towers for a living, and I promise you, what holds everything up is always the part you never see, the foundation, the base." He set the bear back upright. "That's the foundation of this house. A toy a woman who wasn't his mother sewed for a little girl who wasn't her daughter one night, without anybody asking her to, and without charging for it. That holds up more than concrete. That's the one thing that doesn't crack when the ground shakes." The reporter didn't know what to write. He left with his notebook nearly empty, the way people leave when they came to measure a man with the wrong tape. The following winter, 2 years after that marble lobby, the house with the east-facing room filled up with a brand new kind of crying. A boy. Born before dawn, with Jack pacing the hallway, his hands so good at holding weight, absolutely useless with nerves. He who knew how to hold up towers had no idea what to do with 7 pounds of sun. When they finally set the baby in his arms, he held him the same careful way he held whatever mattered most from underneath, supporting the base of the head, the part you don't see, but that's what actually holds everything up. Josie, who was in school now and read fluently, and still wouldn't let anyone touch a single stitch on the bear, came to look at her little brother. She'd been told that with a new baby, you have to learn to share, and she'd thought it over carefully. "I'll lend Bruno to him," she announced with the gravity of someone handing over a kingdom. "But only in the daytime. At night, he's still mine." And she brought the bear down off the shelf and set him for a little while in the crib next to the newborn, so the youngest member of the family would fall asleep from his very first night with the only inheritance that ever really got passed down in that family. Not the tower, not the accounts at the Sterling Group, the bear, the mended thing, the proof with one button eye that people don't get replaced, they get repaired, they get chosen. They get lifted back up when they fall. That night, late Vivian found Jack standing in front of the empty shelf, looking at the spot where the bear should have been sleeping downstairs with the baby instead. He wasn't sad exactly. If anything, he was the other thing full to the edge with something a quiet man doesn't know how to let go of except by staring at furniture. Josie took him down to the crib, she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I know," Jack said. "It's good that he's down there. That's what foundations are for, being down where nobody sees them, holding everything up." He turned around and looked at the woman who'd chosen him poor in a house with a leaky roof. "I spent my whole life hiding what I had, afraid of being loved for it, and it turned out the one thing that actually mattered couldn't be hidden anyway because nobody ever sees it. It was down there the whole time." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for going down to get him, Vivian. Nobody ever went that deep for me before." Outside the city was still full of glass towers, with his name on the billboards, tall, bright, staring at each other. None of them knew. The towers never know that their owner was home that night, in a low, ordinary house, no view, no luxury, winding the one thing that actually held him up, and it was nothing anybody could see from the street. And if you made it this far at this hour, with the house asleep and the screen the only light left on, stay a second before you move on. Maybe tonight somebody made you feel like your worth is what you have, what you produce, what you're able to give. Maybe, like Vivian, you learned to count your value in a currency somebody else picked out for you. And maybe underneath it, you're afraid that if one day you had nothing left to offer, nobody would stay. Listen to this part because it's worth hearing. What holds a person up isn't what shows. It isn't the job or the face or the bank account or the last name. All of that is the wall, and walls crack. What survives the tremor sits further down where nobody's looking. It's your way of sewing a stranger's teddy bear back together one night without being asked and without charging for it. That's you, and no builder alive can put a crack in that. Here's one question to sit with, head on the pillow. When you look at yourself tomorrow, are you going to keep measuring yourself with the tape of people who only loved you for what you were useful for? Or are you going to go down just once and find the foundation in yourself that nobody sees, and that's worth more than any tower? You don't have to answer that tonight, just think about it. And if this story kept you a little warm on a long night stay a while longer, there's always another one waiting for the nights you can't sleep. Because people don't get replaced, they get mended, they get chosen. Somebody keeps them button eye and all. And you, since you made it all the way here, you're already worth somebody staying for.